Now, 1 foot off center.
And now it's on, gonna blow your mind.
Rick Maddison here with 1 foot off center. We have our good friends. We actually made it into the hierarchy. You know, not Rogan, but went up there because we have a sponsor. Soil to Sod Landscaping. You have landscaping? Oh, good. We have a sponsor that does landscaping. How great is that? So builders, if you have a home improvement project, Ron won't call them. He's in a tower. But Jeff will, and Scott will, and I already got it done. So I'm already doing that. So Soil to Sod, Pat Walchuk. Try to spell it if you can. If you can, you get a $5 Tim cards. Okay. Let's dive into this. Is coming up. You know, there's a little talk about tariffs and that kind of thing, and food security. What is the future of agriculture in the Okanagan? Because we have ALR, we have areas. Everyone's driven from on Benville and past great tracts of green land, and we're going, what is happening here? We happen to have Ron Mattiussi sitting over here, and Ron, this has probably come up a few times in council meetings, but what is the future of agriculture with this whole appetite for growth in the Okanagan?
Heck if I know. No. No, I think it's well past time that we look at the role of agriculture, first provincially, but also, I mean, you mentioned Benville, and everybody talks about that strip of land, but apparently it's one of the most fertile pieces of land in the province. It's the nature of this valley we live in. We took something called the Canada Land Inventory that was created, probably in the 50s and 60s, and for the nation, and it classified soil, and then out of that, we then back in the 70s, first in Niagara, put a land reserve aside, and then in LPC, but so the policy that generated the land reserve, comes out of the 70s. I don't know about you, but I don't have anything left from the 70s.
Just a lot of allure.
I do have that tracksuit. Yeah,
I wasn't born.
Yeah, there you go.
So you're saying back in the 70s, that's when it was created. So now, of course, evolution.
You think about farming, and we had orchards and we had orchardists, and that was their job. And they might have had a second job. They may have worked at Western Star. They may have worked whatever they may have had, but that was their primary role. And look at the landscape today. Mm-hmm. We have vineyards, which may or may not produce a lot of wine. Certainly none of it gets exported. Even the biggest, probably doesn't. So we have cherries, which seems to be pretty robust. But what is the future? And do we really know what we're protecting? I kind of, I've been, since I've been here in the last 30 years, I've been, trying to protect agricultural land. And at some points I scratch my head, why? You drive to Abbotsford, get through Chilliwack, and the biggest Molson brewery in the country is sitting on what was a farm field.
Right.
And you say, well, how did that get built in the land reserve? Well,
so is our distribution for a regional library here.
Yeah. So, and I'm not saying it's bad. I'm not arguing in principle with preserving agricultural land, but are we doing it? Are we doing it well? Is it the right land? Is it in the right place? Preserving it for what? So I think it's about time somebody started asking real questions about, and it's another little tough one we talked about depending on the political party, right? So if the Conservatives won and said we're going to review agriculture, everybody go up in arms. The NDP are in power, but they haven't done it either. So I think there needs to be something, however you panel or whatever you do, that people know that the purpose isn't to get rid of the reserve, but the purpose is how do we preserve agriculture? How do we actually deal with agriculture in 2025 BC?
What do you think, Jeff?
I just think, to Ron's point, he's got to be realistic about it. And you're right, the NDP aren't going to touch it. They formed it, and it's hands off. It's always been hands off for them. You are right. If it was John Rustad, it would be people who'd be losing their minds. And so and again, to get back to it, there's no middle ground on it. There are, to me, it has to be. I would say I'm for it, but again, with some common sense. So So there are rules that exist around the LR today that make no sense to me. So a farmer can only produce up to whatever. So if I'll give you an example. If a farmer produces a finished product like jam, they have to use 50% of the product from their land to produce that jam. Well, that's inefficient. So that means they could invest in line time that could run 10 times what it does if they were allowed to buy fruit from somewhere else, and we don't allow that to happen. How many? Again, I'm a huge fan, but how many carbonated juice drinks? Karma's a great local product. It's a great story. It's all these things. I'm not sure that fits the agricultural land reserve, and I'm not spy. I'm a pro business. I love that story. So and then again to your point, like how much of it, and again it does outlay this, but the consumption of fruit products for alcohol, cherries that get shipped to China, specifically at one time a year when we produce the only cherries in the world, and they come at a significantly heightened cost. These are questions that need to be asked. You dive into things and you talk to people that always want to be unnamed, and so I'll do that. But the reality is, they say, we could grow more carrots, but we're not allowed. And I'm like, well, what do you mean you're not allowed? Well, we have to go to a board to get approved what we grow, and that will drive down prices. And so there's a board in British Columbia that says, no, you can't do 50 acres of carrots. I'm like, this is real. This is real. And then I look around at Bylands and Nursery on the west side, now surrounded by industrial land, and you go, do you think maybe it's time? I mean, I'm sure they'd be open to a conversation, right? So, like, I think this is the piece that's again, it comes back to common sense. I am all for the agricultural land reserve, but I think it's got to get utilized. I mean, again, we all know them, but I mean, there is a piece of land on Springfield that we all drive by on a regular, and just go, really, right?
Yeah.
For that thing's been empty since I was born, which for the record was 1980. Ron, so
God,
this
I feel
is
old.
this is, and I feel old these days. So that's the challenge, right? Is it broken? Yeah. Now, who's willing to actually step up and have a conversation about it? And I think that's the question. And where does this go from here?
Where does Trinity Baptist sit?
We're pretty close. There's a different organization called Fortis BC, which is right beside that. So that is.
Well, it's an agricultural.
It's an agricultural minded entity.
You have flocks that you're trying to say.
We are right. Like which one's more important, right?
Biblical reference.
We might have had a conversation or two about said land and ran into the little ALR. But I actually talked to Jerry Ton a number of months ago, and he was one of the ones that helped create that for Kelowna back in the day. And he said even in the 70s, he goes, it was brilliant back then. But he goes, it has to evolve. Like there's no way. It's amazing that it's lasted this long. And speaking of faith communities, like you think of it this way, back in the 70s, people weren't having a destination wedding outside at a winery or some experience, and that evolution now has changed. So I've got friends that are in Lake Country, different districts, but under the ALR as well, and they, reconstituted the land. They expanded their property. They planted vineyards, and they want to have this just small venue for weddings and events. And the egregious rules that they have to fall under, and that they've had to build roads that are useless. They've had to backfill this, and they still cannot get a license. And it is so, they've been gracious, but they're so frustrated because there's so many hurdles to get through. And all they want to do, it's a family. They want to have a great business. They want to add value to the community. They've talked to their neighbors. They've connected with the wineries to plant vineyards on behalf of the wine. Like they've done all the right things, and they still can't do it. And shout out to 99 Rose. And I feel for them in a deep way. And I go, there's value, but it has to be informed. We've got a farm right on Benvelin called Helen's Acres in partnership with the Legacy Foundation. And even that, we wanted to be creative about how we use that land. It produces over 100,000 pounds of fresh fruit every year for the Okanagan Food Bank, direct not indirect, not seconds. It's grown directly from strawberries to everything. So the intent and the execution is incredible. And they do that, and the food bank is loving this fresh produce that people get. But then their ability to use their property to fundraise or to host events is so limited that it just restricts the potential of what they could do and how they could grow that. And so something has to change.
It's the insanity, because I hear this all the time too, that fruit farmer can sell a fruit, but if they want to sell a T-shirt with their logo on it because they can't. And like they're going to make $1 million off selling 30 T-shirts a year, or people that produce plants can't sell pots or can't sell fertilizer, which is ironic, because if they go buy that plant at Rona, all of that is there and waiting for you. And so now you're either making two stops or you're not supporting local. And again, this is where it comes back to, like, it's just not, we've lost our way. Like we're not applying common sense. Like selling T-shirts or selling pots is going to make that farmer rich. And that's the part that just gets frustrating.
I started questioning years ago, and although I have to admit the local reps are pretty good. I mean, they're dealing with provincial policy and a lot of stuff. They've done a good job for us over the years. But I remember when grow ops were legalizing, you saw a lot of people get in the business, and you could put up a tilt-up concrete warehouse on ALR land because the ALR made the determination that it was like non-soil based agriculture.
Yeah.
At the city, we just that looks like an industrial use to me.
What about Rick's grow up in his backyard? Does that fall into the same?
Small.
Just small.
5 plants.
500 plants, 600 plants.
But going back to your comment, Ron, about 1970s was when this is originally created.
Yeah.
I mean, Homestead Foods won Excellence in Agriculture, and they have a hydroponics operation that blows amazing amounts of food out in volume. Like we're talking thousands of pounds of food on a very innovative gear system, and it comes around, it gets the perfect amount of water, perfect amount of nutrients, and it produces this amazingly great lettuce. So the game has changed. Sometimes you don't even need land. You just need a really tall Quonset or building. So I think that's the other part of this too, is that agriculture's changed. It should change since the 1970s. So what are we doing?
Yeah, no, I mean, 1970s, Lauren Russworm, University of Waterloo, made these proposals, and the government's put them in place, but not a lot. I mean, things have changed, but not the fundamentals of what are we doing?
I think the last piece that we see less of here, but when you go to Vancouver, that needs to be addressed is where the opposite. So you have you can't host an event, but you can build a 7,000 square foot mansion on 40 acres, and all of a sudden we've just created
Highway 10.
These excessive estates that are subject to limited taxes because of where they are. Like it just, again, it comes back to it. Like, it's not adding up to me, right? So it has to be reviewed, but this provincial government has no interest in doing it.
When they annexed this 1970, before your time, when the city of Kelowna went from 8 to 88 square miles, they put in place a measure to ensure that the farms weren't hurt. And so you got your agricultural land was assessed, if it was assessed at all, very low. Your improvement was assessed at 50%. And that's probably still there. And if you wonder why the McMansions, are out there. And at one point, the city tried to change it, and it did not go over very well, obviously. But you look at that, and the city at the time said, well, this is now shifting. Most of these people are, yes, there's agricultural pursuit on their property, but these things are shifting. And I can't remember the number, but for the whole the south and east Kelowna, we've got something like $20,000 of tax, but we have to plow roads and do, so there's this kind of a weird imbalance on everything, right?
If you put in perspective, and like you said, I wasn't around, but there's a great story that I've heard time and time again. So if you think about that was done in the 70s, Capri Insurance was formed in 1976, and Evan Glenn. So I took over for Glenn, but before Sarah was when it was Capri. They used to tell the story. They left Bernard, and they cut a deal with Kaposi to take space in the Capri Mall, and everyone said, you are crazy. No one will drive out of town to buy insurance. And I used to tell that story all the time. And so, but I think it puts it in perspective, right? Like we talk, and I think it can go quick and say like, oh, the 70s, but it's like, that's the difference in Kelowna, right?
Yeah. Right.
Capri Mall at that time was considered a destination and out of town. And they said, you guys will never have success. That's way too far.
Same thing happened with Kettle Valley. I was part of that original planning and everything. I'm like, who's going to drive up there? I ended up buying a house up there. We're going to switch gears, the lightning round here, because we're a bit short on time. An area close to my heart, but fireproofing the Okanagan. Do we feel safe based on 2023? Snowpack this year is, it's probably in the 80s or something like that. I always, because I had my house burned down, I'm a little bit, I watch the lake levels. Like I drive by, and if the lake levels, and I know one guy, we'll talk about that one time too, one guy controls that outflow. But for me, I always wonder about, are we doing enough? And full disclosure, I am producing a documentary on this, but I just wanted to know the panel. And by the way, Scott Lanigan,
if we're writing a book, can we promote that as well, or like?
But part of me is wondering, what do you all think? And we'll start with you, Scott. Like we're going into summer. How do you feel about the Okanagan and its chances?
You always think about fires in the summer as you hit May. April, May, June, you always think, well, what's this summer going to be like? Are we going to get a summer where we luck out? And I always think of it from that perspective, more so than, hey, are we going to prevent it this year? And I think you're so right. It's so dependent on snowpacks and lake levels and saturation from rain. But I think that fire that just a couple of years ago that crossed the lake, that I think terrified a lot of people. My wife worked out at UBCO, and and the UBCO is like, we got to evacuate, and you never thought with a fire that started in West Kelowna that you're going to be hearing, hey, we have to evacuate UBCO. And I think that really changed the perspective of many folks living in the valley, but also I think myself, I think about it often in that sense. And so I always wonder, what are we proactively doing this year, and how are we using technologies and proactive solutions that I don't always think are there. I don't hear people talking about that. I hear people talking about, well, we'll just raise our budget to provide more money. And I remember years ago, and part of that, some of your documentary that you're working on, that they used to be much more creative in using and empowering forestry crews and those type of things that were out there and going, hey, you've got the equipment out there. We don't have to have somebody with a contract that we have to wait for, because the first hours of that fire are the most important. And if you can you can establish a corridor, you can do those things right away, I think we're much more successful at overcoming them. But I always kind of have a worry about it.
Mr. Cox, what do you think about the Okanagan? You feel safe?
I think as Canada and as British Columbia, we haven't even started to do fire suppression. And I'm not a climate denier at all. Climate change is real, but it's to be sincere that like there's such an attachment between the climate's changing and we're burning down. Well, 300 years ago, Indigenous groups in this valley actually did fire suppression. Like this is the amazing part to me. So this is not new. They cleaned the forests around the areas that they were inhabiting. Like the fact that we just blindly think that there's can you believe this? Yeah, I can, because we've abandoned Indigenous people that have been doing this for hundreds of years, and then we can't figure out what's going wrong. You can't let a forest have a lifespan. We know that. I mean, I learned that in grade 9, I'm pretty sure, right? Like or geography 12, or like somewhere along the lines, I learned some very basic knowledge that when I hear people talk, I go, obviously you didn't have Mr. Sanders as a teacher, because this is not new, and this is what I don't understand. So why are we not doing forest management practices that we know work? And you and I have talked about this in depth. There are There are states in the U.S. that are doing it and not having fires. What do you know, right? There are places in Europe that are doing this on a regular basis and not having their city burn down every 10 years. So the technology is a component of it, but common sense is another component of it. And looking back, like, who knew that 300 years ago, Indigenous people were already doing fire suppression and mitigation in a time when they didn't have the technology we have today? It's insanity to think that we're not doing it. But the reality is, fires, and this is where it gets a little bit leaning one way. Fires drive jobs, they drive cost, and they drive funding from the federal government. And I'm sorry, but it plays a role in it. It injected something like $300 million in the BC government in 2024. I can't remember the number cold. But it's enough that you go, it might be reactive for a reason.
Right. Mr. Ron, you were a big part of that. You didn't start the fire, but
I didn't start the fire.
See what I said there?
Keep going, Scott. I need a soundtrack. Fire Smart, what do we do? Fire Smart, we brought up the last fire. My first fire was 2003. I did about 10 over my career. Mostly getting people out of the way. Nobody's stopping a fire unless you hit it initially. After that, it's just pretty much going to go and you get people out of the way. Fire Smart, one of the things that when the 2003 fire happened, a guy by the name of Gerhard Blank, who owned Wilden, very seriously took the idea that mitigation was going to be important, put into place a mitigation program that's there to this day. If you go to their website, they actually explain to their residents that they're not commercial foresters. They're actually going in and cleaning out the forest that makes it a wilderness area. When the fire hit, the fire landed in Wilden, and it did exactly what Fire Smart said. It ran on the ground. They put it out, and I think there was like a garage. And sorry for the people that may have lost it, but it could have been West Kelowna. It could have been what happened in the region, but it didn't, because in fact the neighborhood had undertaken Fire Smart program. To your point, there was nothing to burn on the ground. It was so I think there are ways to mitigate. On the forestry, I'm not a forestry guy, but I think we do have very unhealthy forests, and nobody wants to spend the money to do that, to bring them up to steam. So, I think the best thing we could do as communities and as residents is to really take a look at Fire Smart. Fires are part of where we live in a fire ecosystem. The First Nations knew that. They knew where the fire was. The next year there'd be deer and game because they have the fresh shoots. So I think we have to recognize we live in a fire ecosystem and think about what we could do to mitigate and put pressure to, best way not to have a rank 6 fire hit your neighborhood is to not be rank 6 when it gets there.
Right.
So I had a question for you, because you're talking about a neighborhood. Built for profit in Kelowna.
Yep.
Whose shoulders does this fall on? I mean, it's phenomenal. I didn't know that story. And I get it's probably all, but provincially, municipally, federally, who needs to own this? Because I would like to hear that from you. What is the answer to that?
I think municipal, provincial. I mean, sometimes they bump heads. I think, and if you look at the municipality, they put these things in place. But part of the problem is people are pretty short-sighted. So if you haven't had a fire in a year, and all of a sudden you have to take a wildfire permit because you live in an interface area, then you get really mad at the bureaucracy. So you can't win sometimes. But I think it's provincial, municipal, and I think that in the case of Wilden, he had so much land that he knew he didn't want to see burn down and affect that he implemented very far-sighted, far ahead of his time. So
it's funny, part of the documentary, bcisburning.ca, if you want to see it, the trailer anyway. But it's interesting, part of the documentary is we're talking to Rick Pasuto, who was actually the head guy for mitigation efforts in Wilden. And we were on site and we saw this beautiful grassland with singed trees. And I'm like, was the fire here? And he says, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. This is all beautiful forest, and residents were walking by and they walking through this park because it looks incredible. And it's thick bark trees that got the singe, but honestly, it looked beautiful. So further to your point,
In 2003, my neighborhood up in Southcrest, the parkland that was there, the city had done the same, and that neighborhood wasn't touched. Fire ran along the ground just like it should.
we've got to go, but I'd like to thank Scott Lanigan, Jeff Cox, Ron Mattiussi. We are 1 foot off center, and thanks to our friends at Soil to Sod. You need landscaping? Go get it. Soil to Sod. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening.